The diamond on my finger catches the light as I study the sleeping face of Maxwell Whitfield, powerful, feared, completely oblivious. If he knew who I really was, not Elise Carter, his adoring fiancée, but Rebecca Reynolds, daughter of the man he drove to suicide, he'd never rest so peacefully beside me. "She's nothing without me," he told his friends at the golf club yesterday. I smiled and poured his champagne, while mentally calculating how many more shares of his company Nemesis Capital needed to purchase before I owned his entire world. 3 years of planning, 8 months of playing the perfect prey. Maxwell destroyed my father without a second thought. Now I'm weeks away from revealing that the greatest mistake of his life wasn't crushing Edward Reynolds, it was underestimating his daughter. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. I stood in the gleaming bathroom of the Waldorf Astoria, staring at my reflection. The woman who gazed back at me had auburn hair falling in soft waves around delicate shoulders, green eyes carefully enhanced with just the right amount of makeup, and lips painted a subtle pink. Perfect for looking harmless, unthreatening, naive. "You can do this," I whispered, practicing my innocent smile. 3 years of planning had led to this moment. Tonight, I would meet Maxwell Whitfield for the first time, though he had no idea I'd been studying him for months. His company, Whitfield Enterprises, had destroyed my father's business through deliberately predatory tactics and driven him to suicide. Tonight, everything would begin to change. I smoothed down the emerald silk dress I'd chosen specifically for this occasion. Not too revealing, not too conservative. The dress of a woman with money, but without the confidence to flaunt it. The perfect prey for a man like Maxwell Whitfield. The memory hit me like it always did, sudden and visceral. Finding my father slumped over his desk 3 years ago, the note beside him trembling in my shaking hands as I read his final words.
"I'm sorry, Rebecca."
I couldn't fight him. Whitfield took everything. The police called it suicide. I called it murder. In the weeks that followed, I discovered the truth through my father's meticulously kept records. Maxwell Whitfield had a pattern of targeting vulnerable businesses, particularly those owned by women or older men nearing retirement. He would approach with seemingly generous offers, apply economic pressure through shell companies, and then swoop in to acquire everything at pennies on the dollar once the owners were desperate. My father had been his latest victim, but I was determined he would be his last. Taking a deep breath, I left the bathroom and returned to the charity gala, navigating through New York's elite with practiced ease. Maxwell Whitfield wasn't hard to spot, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver streaks in his dark hair that only added to his commanding presence. At 52, he was 25 years my senior, but carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his power. I watched him holding court, laughing with a group of admirers, a champagne flute dangling casually from his fingers. I positioned myself perfectly, timing my movement to intersect with his as he turned away from his conversation. The collision was gentle but effective, champagne splashing across his immaculate tuxedo. "Oh my God," I gasped, eyes wide with horror. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going." His initial irritation was evident in the tightening of his jaw, but as his eyes traveled from my face to my figure and back again, his expression shifted. "Well," he said, dabbing at his jacket with a handkerchief, "I suppose there are worse ways to meet a beautiful woman." I blushed on cue. "I'm Elise Carter," I said, offering my hand. "And I've thoroughly ruined your evening, haven't I?" He took my hand, holding it a moment longer than necessary. "Maxwell Whitfield. And the evening might be salvageable, depending on whether you'll let me buy you a drink to replace the one you sacrificed to my suit." "The least I could do is accept," I replied, allowing a hint of flirtation into my smile. As he guided me toward the bar, I saw his eyes assess my dress, my jewelry, calculating my worth. He didn't recognize my altered last name. My father had been Edward Reynolds, head of Reynolds Construction, before Whitfield stripped him of everything including his dignity. Over drinks, I played my role perfectly, the daughter of a small-time investor who had some success but never reached the upper echelons of New York society. I allowed Maxwell to explain basic financial concepts to me, responding with just enough intelligence to keep his interest, but never enough to threaten his ego. "And what brings you to this particular charity, Elise?" he asked, his gaze intense. "Most young women your age would be at more energetic gatherings." I looked down, letting vulnerability show. "My aunt passed recently. She was involved with this foundation. I thought attending would honor her memory." I hesitated, then added the hook. "She left me a small fortune, actually. I'm still not sure what to do with it. Investments seems so complicated." I watched the predatory gleam spark in his eyes, the same expression I'd seen in photos taken with my father. Maxwell Whitfield never could resist fresh meat. "Perhaps I could offer some guidance," he suggested smoothly. "I have some experience in these matters." "That would be wonderful." I breathed, as if he'd offered me the moon. 2 hours later, he was insisting on my number and a dinner date the following evening to make up for ruining my dress, though we both knew who had spilled the champagne. I accepted with carefully measured reluctance, the perfect balance of interest and hesitation. In the weeks that followed, Maxwell pursued me with increasing intensity. I kept him at arm's length, creating the illusion that I wasn't easily won over, that he would need to work for my affections. Each time he took me to dinner at exclusive restaurants or brought me to high-profile events, I revealed another carefully crafted detail about my fictional life and the inheritance that had me so confused about proper investment strategies. Meanwhile, I was establishing Nemesis Capital using my actual inheritance, modest by Whitfield standards but sufficient for my purposes. The anonymous investment firm began making small, strategic purchases in companies adjacent to Whitfield Enterprises, positions that would prove useful as my plan progressed. After 3 months, Maxwell finally introduced me to his inner circle during a dinner at his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The men, they were all men, treated me with superficial courtesy while exchanging knowing glances over my head. When I excused myself to the powder room, I deliberately took a wrong turn, finding myself outside Maxwell's home office. The door was unlocked. 15 minutes later, I had photographed documents revealing his company's vulnerabilities and upcoming acquisition targets. Before leaving, I placed a small listening device under his desk, the first of many I would plant throughout his homes and offices. "There you are," Maxwell said, finding me returning from the wrong direction. "Get lost." "Your home is enormous," I laughed, touching his arm apologetically. "I think I took a tour of half the penthouse by accident." He chuckled, wrapping a possessive arm around my waist. "Well, I'd be happy to show you the master bedroom later," he whispered in my ear. I blushed again, pulling away. "Maxwell, we've discussed this. I'm traditional about certain things." He sighed but nodded. My resistance only made him want me more, a calculated risk on my part, but one that kept him firmly on the hook. Later that evening, as his friends were leaving, I overheard his closest associate, James Wilson, warning him in low tones by the door. "She's smart. Max too smart, maybe. Be careful." Maxwell laughed dismissively. "She's nothing without me, James. Just arm candy with a pretty face who knows nothing about business. But she's got that inheritance burning a hole in her pocket, and I know exactly where it should go." My fingers tightened around my champagne glass as I pretended not to hear. If only he knew that at that very moment, Nemesis Capital had just acquired a 5% stake in Whitfield Enterprises through a complex web of shell companies. Over the following months, I expanded my surveillance network throughout Maxwell's properties. The intelligence I gathered revealed the truth behind his billionaire facade. Whitfield Enterprises was highly leveraged with significant debt hidden in shell companies. The empire that had crushed my father stood on a foundation of sand. One aggressive competitor could topple everything, and I intended to be that competitor. I carefully cultivated the image Maxwell wanted to see, an attractive, somewhat naive woman dazzled by his world. I ensured he saw me reading financial magazines and asking innocent questions about business concepts. He loved mansplaining basic principles to me, never suspecting that I'd completed an MBA from Wharton in secret after my father's death, funded by the small insurance policy that was his only legacy to me. 6 months into our relationship, On a crisp autumn day at his country club, Maxwell dropped to one knee in front of his assembled friends and presented a diamond ring that could have choked a horse. "Elise Carter," he announced grandly, "you've brought light back into my life. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The gathered crowd of New York elite gasped appropriately. All eyes turned to me, standing there in my carefully selected white sundress, looking suitably shocked and overwhelmed. "Yes," I whispered, allowing tears to fill my eyes as Maxwell slipped the obscene diamond onto my finger. He stood and kissed me to applause from the crowd. "She'll never have to worry about money again," he announced proudly to his golf buddies, as if I weren't standing right there. The men all laughed and clapped him on the back. If only they knew. By that point, Nemesis Capital had quietly acquired 10% of Whitfield Enterprises through various shell companies and proxy investors. The trap was set, and Maxwell had just walked into it with a diamond ring and his boundless arrogance. 2 weeks after our engagement, Maxwell presented me with a thick document bound in expensive leather. "Just a formality, darling," he said, sliding the prenuptial agreement across his dining table. "My lawyers insist." I pretended to look hurt, letting my fingers trace the embossed cover without opening it. "I thought we trusted each other, Max." "It's not about trust," he said, his tone growing patronizing. "It's about protection. All men in my position have these agreements. It doesn't mean anything." I maintained my hesitation for exactly 3 days, long enough to worry him, but not so long that he'd become suspicious. Meanwhile, my own lawyers identified subtle but critical loopholes we could exploit later. When I finally signed, I made sure to look slightly teary-eyed. "I'm marrying you for love, not money," I told him, batting my eyelashes even as his attorney gave me pitying looks across the table. "Poor, naive girl," the woman's eyes seemed to say. "You have no idea what you're getting into." If only she knew. With our engagement announced in all the right publications, Maxwell began including me in more business events, but always introduced me as my beautiful fiancé, rather than by name. At a charity auction the following week, I was admiring a painting when I felt someone's gaze on me. I turned to find a striking woman in her 50s observing me with shrewd blue eyes. "I know what you're doing," she said without preamble. My heart stuttered, but I maintained my composure. "Excuse me?" The wide-eyed ingenue act. She sipped her champagne. "It's good, but not quite perfect. There's something in your eyes, calculation maybe." I stiffened, preparing to defend myself, when she laughed softly. "Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. I've wanted to see Maxwell Whitfield taken down for years." She extended her hand. "Sophia Winters." The name struck me immediately. "You were your father's business partner before Maxwell forced me out, yes." She slipped a business card into my clutch. "Call me when you're ready to talk. We have a lot in common." Before I could respond, Maxwell appeared at my elbow, his arm snaking possessively around my waist. "Making friends, darling?" Sophia's demeanor changed instantly, becoming cool and professional. "Just introducing myself to your fiancé, Maxwell. Congratulations on your engagement." He nodded curtly, clearly not recognizing her. "Thank you. If you'll excuse us, we should circulate." As he led me away, I glanced back to see Sophia watching us with a knowing smile. 3 days later, I met Sophia at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from Maxwell's usual haunts. She arrived precisely on time, dressed in an impeccable navy suit that spoke of quiet wealth and authority. "You've accomplished something remarkable," she said after we'd ordered coffee. Getting that close to him, without raising suspicion. "I've been planning this for 3 years," I replied, dropping the naive act completely for the first time in months. It felt like removing a suffocating mask. "He destroyed my father's company by using shell corporations to undermine his contracts and supplier relationships," Sophia explained. "When I tried to fight back, he had me blacklisted throughout the industry. I've been gathering evidence of his illegal activities for years, but I lack the resources to act on it." "I have resources," I said, "but need more insider information." Sophia smiled, a predator recognizing another of her kind. "I think we can help each other." Our alliance formed that afternoon. She would provide intelligence from her network of former Whitfield employees still loyal to her, and I would provide the financial backing through Nemesis Capital. Together, we began crafting a strategy to dismantle Maxwell's empire brick by brick. Using Sophia's intelligence, Nemesis Capital began targeting Maxwell's most profitable subsidiaries, outbidding him on crucial acquisitions and poaching his key employees with better offers. My wedding planning provided the perfect cover for frequent shopping trips that were actually business meetings with Sophia and other allies we recruited along the way. Maxwell became increasingly stressed as mysterious business setbacks mounted. His perfect facade began to crack, revealing the true character beneath. His temper flared in private, first at household staff, then at business associates, and eventually at me. "Where were you today?" he demanded one evening when I returned from a meeting with the CEO of his largest competitor. I called 4 times. "Wedding dress shopping," I replied, showing him the garment bag I'd arranged to have delivered as cover. I turned my phone off for the fitting. "I'm sorry, I should have told you." His jaw worked with barely suppressed anger. "Next time, keep your phone on."
I needed you.
"Of course," I said softly, noting with satisfaction how his hand trembled slightly as he poured himself a scotch. The pressure was getting to him. I documented every instance of his volatile behavior with hidden cameras and recording devices, evidence for later, when I would need to convince the board of his instability. Through Sophia's contacts and my own investigations, I discovered Maxwell's darkest secret. He'd been systematically stealing intellectual property from struggling startups, then suing them into oblivion when they complained. This was exactly how he had destroyed my father, stealing his proprietary construction techniques, patenting them himself, then suing Reynolds Construction for infringement until my father couldn't afford to fight back. I hired private investigators to find all the victims of this scheme, promising them justice and restitution if they would add their evidence to our growing arsenal. At our lavish engagement party at the Plaza Hotel, I was approached by a young man with familiar features, Maxwell's eyes and jawline in a younger face. "Congratulations," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You'll be stepmother to a son older than you are." "Adrian," I replied, recognizing him from my research. Maxwell's son from his first marriage. He seemed surprised I knew of him. "Dad doesn't usually mention me to his companions. I make it my business to know about the important people in Maxwell's life." Adrian snorted. "I'm hardly important to him. Just a reminder of a marriage he'd rather forget." He studied me with narrowed eyes. "You don't seem like his usual type. Too smart." I smiled noncommittally. Perhaps he's evolving. Dad doesn't evolve. He discards people when they're no longer useful. Adrian took a sip of his champagne. Just a friendly warning. Later that evening, I found Adrian alone on the terrace. "I have a proposition for you," I said without preamble.
I'm listening.
"I know why you hate your father. I know he cut you out of your grandfather's company and inheritance. Help me take him down, and I'll make sure you get what's rightfully yours." Adrian stared at me for a long moment, then laughed softly. "I knew you weren't what you seemed. What's your real story?" "Similar to yours. Maxwell destroyed my father, who then took his own life. I'm here for justice, not love." He considered this, then nodded. "I have access to family documents that might interest you, including proof that Dad's initial fortune came from embezzling from my grandfather's company." "Perfect," I replied. "That gives us legal standing to challenge the foundation of his wealth." By this point, Nemesis Capital owned 25% of Whitfield Enterprises, still not controlling interest, but enough to have significant influence. When a critical board vote approached regarding the acquisition of a tech startup with valuable patents, Maxwell needed to ensure all shareholders were aligned. "I need you to trust me on this one, Elise," he said the night before the vote, explaining nothing about the actual deal. "It's important for our future." "Of course, darling," I agreed sweetly, even as I used Sophia's connections to rally opposition votes among the smaller shareholders we'd identified as having grievances against Maxwell. The vote failed spectacularly, costing Maxwell a $500 million deal. I watched the color drain from his face as the results came in during an emergency board call he took from our bedroom. "Impossible," he muttered after hanging up. Someone's working against me. I sat beside him on the bed, rubbing his shoulders sympathetically. Who would do such a thing? I don't know, he growled, but when I find out, they'll regret it. He shrugged off my touch and stalked to the bar cart, pouring himself a double scotch with shaking hands. As he stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The mighty Maxwell Whitfield, who had destroyed so many lives, including my father's, was beginning to crumble. And he still had no idea that his greatest enemy was the woman warming his bed and wearing his ring. That evening, while Maxwell slept fitfully beside me, I slipped out to the balcony and called Sophia. "It's working," I whispered. "He's starting to unravel." "Good," she replied. "But be careful. A wounded animal is most dangerous when cornered." I ended the call and gazed out at the glittering city below. Nemesis Capital now owned 27% of Whitfield Enterprises. Each day brought me closer to my goal. Soon, very soon, Maxwell Whitfield would learn exactly who he was dealing with and what it had cost him to dismiss me as nothing without him. Our lavish wedding was now 6 months away, with the ceremony planned for the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. Maxwell insisted I take a more active role in the preparations while he focused on saving the business from whatever mysterious forces were working against him. I accepted this task with apparent enthusiasm, using the newfound freedom to travel extensively for venue research and vendor meetings that were actually business dealings with his international competitors. "Paris is essential, darling," I told him one evening as I packed. "The French do floral arrangements like no one else. And then I simply must visit Milan for at least 3 days to finalize the menu with that chef you love." Maxwell nodded distractedly, his attention focused on the financial reports that showed another unexplained drop in his company's stock value. "Of course, whatever you need. Just keep me updated on costs." "Always so practical," I teased, kissing his cheek while mentally calculating how many more shares of Whitfield Enterprises I could acquire during this European trip. What Maxwell didn't know was that I discovered he had hired a private investigator to look into my background. The PI had been following me for weeks, but I'd been careful to maintain my cover. Now, I needed to ensure he found exactly what Maxwell wanted to see. In Paris, I created an elaborate false trail, visiting bridal salons and florists during the day while conducting my real business at night. I even hired actors to pose as old-school friends who, coincidentally, ran into me at cafes, engaging in carefully scripted conversations about our fictional shared past for the benefit of the PI I knew was watching. By the time I returned to New York, Maxwell's investigator had submitted his report confirming that I was exactly who I claimed to be, a naive socialite with a modest inheritance and no hidden agenda. The irony almost made me laugh out loud when Maxwell casually mentioned that he'd had me checked out as a standard precaution for someone in his position. "And," I asked, pretending offense, "did I pass your test?" "With flying colors," he assured me, pulling me close. "You're exactly who you say you are. That's rare in my world." If only he knew how rare. As the weeks passed, Maxwell's right-hand man, Victor Thompson, began to suspect something wasn't right about the company's stock movements. I overheard him warning Maxwell during a dinner party at our Hamptons estate. "Someone's systematically acquiring shares through shell companies," Victor said in low tones as they stood by the pool, unaware that one of my recording devices was hidden in the nearby ornamental grasses. "The patterns are too deliberate to be coincidence." Maxwell dismissed his concerns with a wave. "Probably Jenkins at Marecorp. He's always had his eye on my company." "I don't think so," Victor insisted. "This is more sophisticated. We should investigate further." This was becoming dangerous. Victor was sharper than Maxwell, less blinded by arrogance. I needed to neutralize him quickly. During that same weekend, I noticed tension between Victor and his wife, Diane, the subtle signs of a troubled marriage I'd become adept at identifying during my years of preparation. I made a point of befriending her, suggesting we have lunch in the city the following week. Over martinis at an exclusive restaurant, I gently steered our conversation toward her marriage. "It must be difficult," I said sympathetically, "being married to someone who works so closely with Maxwell." The demands must be endless. Diane sighed, the alcohol loosening her tongue. You have no idea. Victor's never home, and when he is, he's distracted. Always worried about the company. Maxwell mentioned how valuable Victor is, I prompted. He handles all the sensitive financial matters, doesn't he? Pride loosened her restraint further. Victor's practically running Whitfield Enterprises these days. He's the only one Maxwell trusts with the offshore accounts. I widened my eyes. Offshore accounts? That sounds complicated. Oh, it is, Diane confirmed, leaning in conspiratorially. Victor set up this whole system in the Caymans years ago. That's how they avoid the taxes. She lowered her voice. And, between us, I think Victor's been skimming a little off the top for years. He thinks I don't know about the second apartment in Miami. She laughed bitterly. He's saving for his exit strategy. 20 years of marriage, and he's planning his escape. By the end of lunch, I had enough information to destroy both Victor and his marriage. I had Sophia verify the details about the Miami property, then anonymously sent the evidence to Maxwell, making it appear to come from a concerned employee in the accounting department. 3 days later, Maxwell fired Victor in a rage, eliminating his most astute lieutenant. That evening, he came home looking exhausted but triumphant. You wouldn't believe the day I've had, he told me as I handed him his usual scotch. Had to let Victor go. The bastard was stealing from me for years. I gasped appropriately. Victor? But he seemed so loyal. No one is loyal in business, Maxwell said bitterly. Remember that. Oh, I would. You need someone you can trust, I suggested carefully. Maybe someone younger, with fresh ideas but less ambition? Maxwell considered this, nodding slowly. You might be right. There's that kid in finance. What's his name?
Parker.
Smart but eager to please. Might be time to give him more responsibility. That sounds perfect, I agreed, hiding my satisfaction. Jeffrey Parker was indeed smart but inexperienced, and more importantly, one of Adrian's friends from college who had already agreed to help us in exchange for a guaranteed position after the takeover. With Victor gone and Parker promoted, another piece of my plan fell into place. But complications arose from an unexpected quarter when a financial journalist began investigating the unusual stock movements around Whitfield Enterprises. Laura Bennett from the Wall Street Journal contacted Maxwell's office requesting an interview about the mysterious investor who had been acquiring significant blocks of company stock. To divert attention, I anonymously fed her information about Maxwell's competitors, suggesting that they were positioning for a hostile takeover. The resulting exposé focused entirely on industry rivalries, directing attention away from Nemesis Capital and my true intentions. Meanwhile, Maxwell's health began to suffer under the mounting stress. I noticed the signs: the interrupted sleep, increased drinking, and occasional hand tremors. During a particularly vulnerable moment following a difficult board meeting, he confessed his fears to me as we lay in bed. The business isn't as solid as everyone thinks, he admitted, his voice rough with fatigue. Too much debt, too many enemies. If it fails, we have nothing. Everything I own is tied up in Whitfield Enterprises. I stroked his hair soothingly, even as I secretly recorded his confession with the device in my nightstand. It won't fail, I assured him. You're too smart to let that happen. I'm not sure that's enough anymore, he murmured before falling into an uneasy sleep. By this point, Nemesis Capital controlled 40% of Whitfield Enterprises through various shells and proxies. I brought Sophia in as the CEO of one of our larger shell companies, positioning her to become a key player when we finally took control. Meanwhile, I convinced Maxwell to put some of his personal assets in my name for tax purposes. It makes sense, I told him over breakfast, showing him the proposal my financial advisor had prepared. If we separate some of your personal holdings from the business, we create a safety net. Maxwell reviewed the documents skeptically. This would put the Hamptons house and the art collection in your name. I widened my eyes innocently. Is that a problem? We'll be married soon. What's yours is mine, right? He laughed, the sound hollow with exhaustion. Of course not. I trust you completely. He signed the papers without reading them fully, missing the clauses that would prevent him from reclaiming these assets without my explicit consent. As our plan accelerated, Maxwell became increasingly paranoid. He implemented extreme security measures in his offices and began keeping secrets even from me. I played the hurt fiancé while using Adrian's access to continue gathering intelligence from inside Maxwell's inner sanctum. At a crucial moment in the fourth quarter, Maxwell's Japanese partners threatened to pull out of a deal that would save his struggling European division. In desperation, he turned to me during dinner at our penthouse. "The Nakamura Group is walking away," he said, pushing his plate aside untouched. "Without their investment, the European restructuring fails, and we lose everything." I set down my fork, careful to show just the right amount of concern. "What about those family connections you're always telling me to cultivate?" "My second cousin interned for a Japanese trade organization last year. Perhaps she knows someone who could help." Maxwell looked at me with desperate hope. "You do that for me?" "Of course, darling. I'll make some calls tonight." What happened next was the most audacious move in my plan so far. I negotiated directly with the Nakamura Group as the anonymous head of Nemesis Capital, securing favorable terms that gave us even more control of Maxwell's company in exchange for bringing the Japanese firm into our confidence about the upcoming takeover. When the deal mysteriously came back to life 3 days later, Maxwell was ecstatic. "You're my lucky charm," he declared, kissing me passionately. "I don't know what you said to them, but it worked." "I just helped make the connection," I demurred. "Your reputation did the rest." Maxwell was so grateful for my help with the Japanese that he moved up our wedding date. "I need you by my side now more than ever," he said, kissing my forehead as we lay in bed that night. "Let's make it happen sooner." I agreed enthusiastically, knowing it would never come to pass. That night, after he fell asleep, I finalized the purchase that put Nemesis Capital's ownership at 48%, just shy of controlling interest. The tipping point was approaching faster than even I had anticipated. As I watched Maxwell's sleeping face, lined with new stress and age, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Soon, very soon, he would understand exactly what it felt like to lose everything just as my father had. Our wedding was now just 2 months away. Maxwell had insisted on accelerating the timeline, desperate for some good news in his life as his business continued its mysterious decline. I suggested we host a small family dinner at his penthouse to bring everyone together before the ceremony. "Excellent idea," Maxwell agreed, visibly tired after another day of fighting unseen enemies. "We'll invite Adrian, my sister Barbara, and of course, James and his wife." I nodded, already formulating my plan. "Perfect. I'll take care of everything." The dinner was elegant but intimate, just as I had planned. I'd researched each guest meticulously, identifying old resentments and rivalries that could be exploited. My weapon of choice was alcohol, keeping glasses filled while I remained clear-headed, strategically placing guests to maximize tension. I seated Barbara next to James, knowing they'd had a brief affair during Barbara's divorce that Maxwell knew nothing about. I positioned Adrian directly across from his father, their strained relationship immediately filling the air with tension. "So, Adrian," I said innocently during the main course, "Maxwell tells me you've been making quite a name for yourself in tech investment." Maxwell frowned. "When did I tell you that? Didn't you?" I blinked. "I must have read it somewhere." "Your son's quite accomplished." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Surprised you'd notice, Dad. You haven't exactly been following my career. Perhaps if you'd stayed in the family business instead of running off to California," Maxwell replied tightly. "You mean the business you wouldn't let me have any real role in?" Adrian shot back. I sipped my wine, watching the tension build. By dessert, Barbara was arguing with Maxwell about their late father's estate. James was uncomfortable with Barbara's husband glaring at him, and Adrian had made 3 cutting remarks about Maxwell's business troubles. Perfect chaos. As the guests departed, Maxwell's oldest friend, Senator Thomas Williams, pulled me aside near the door. "A word of advice," he said quietly. "I've known Max for 30 years. He's incapable of seeing women as equals. He's ruined every relationship he's ever had." "I appreciate your concern," I replied, pressing the button on my bracelet that activated the recording device hidden in my necklace. He uses people, Elise. Always has. When they're no longer useful, he discards them. The senator glanced toward the living room where Maxwell was pouring himself another scotch. Just be careful. Thank you, Senator. I'll keep that in mind. The recording would prove useful later, especially since the senator had accepted bribes from Maxwell for years to push legislation favorable to Whitfield Enterprises. Another piece of leverage secured. A week after the dinner party, I orchestrated a seemingly chance meeting between Sophia and Maxwell at a charity event benefiting education in underserved communities. Maxwell was a major donor, a tax write-off his accountants had recommended, and I'd suggested Sophia attend as the CEO of one of our shell companies. When they were introduced, I watched carefully as Maxwell's eyes passed over Sophia without a flicker of recognition, despite having destroyed her career a decade ago. Sophia Winters, the event coordinator said. She runs Pinnacle Investments. Maxwell shook her hand perfunctorily. Pleasure. Thank you for supporting the cause. As he moved on to greet other donors, I saw Sophia's expression harden. That public slight, not even remembering the woman whose life he'd ruined, gave her the final motivation she needed to fully commit to our plan. He didn't even recognize me, she said later as we sat in my secret office downtown, far from Maxwell's surveillance. 10 years ago, he spent months systematically destroying everything I built, and he doesn't even remember my face. That's why we're doing this, I reminded her. Men like Maxwell need to learn they can't treat people as disposable. Using the pretext of wedding gift shopping, I arranged a meeting with Gregory Barnes, CEO of Maxwell's largest competitor, Barnes Consolidated. We met in a private room at Bergdorf Goodman, ostensibly to discuss a custom wedding present, actually to negotiate the final phase of our takeover plan. Your proposal is intriguing, Barnes said, reviewing the documents I'd provided. Whitfield has been a thorn in my side for years. But why come to me? You're about to marry the man. Let's just say I have personal reasons for wanting to see Whitfield Enterprises transformed, I replied. I'm offering you a detailed roadmap for acquisition with one non-negotiable condition. All employees below executive level keep their jobs. This isn't about collateral damage. This is about justice. Barnes studied me with newfound respect. You're nothing like what the industry gossip suggested. That's been to my advantage, I said with a cold smile. The meeting ended with a handshake agreement. Barnes would stand ready to publicly announce a partnership with the new leadership of Whitfield Enterprises once we completed our takeover. As his business continued to mysteriously struggle, Maxwell became increasingly dependent on me emotionally. For the first time, he brought me into real business discussions, desperate for a fresh perspective. What do you think about this restructuring plan? He asked one evening, spreading documents across our dining table. I studied them carefully, then offered seemingly innocent suggestions that would actually accelerate his company's vulnerability, moving key assets into divisions that would be easier to separate during our takeover, delaying investments that would have strengthened his position. You have remarkable intuition for someone with no business background, he said, looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and growing suspicion. I kissed his cheek. I guess I've learned a lot just from listening to you. The most delicate part of my plan involved bringing Adrian back into Maxwell's orbit. I suggested that Maxwell offer his son leadership of the West Coast Division, which had been struggling since its previous director left abruptly after being poached by one of Nemesis Capital's shell companies. Adrian has proven himself in the tech sector, I pointed out. He has the skills you need, and it would heal the rift between you. Maxwell was suspicious, but so desperate for competent leadership that he agreed. I'll offer him the position, but I doubt he'll accept. He's made it clear he wants nothing to do with me. Let me talk to him, I offered. Sometimes it's easier to hear these things from someone outside the family drama. When I met Adrian at a quiet coffee shop in Brooklyn, his initial response was exactly what I expected. You must be joking, he laughed. Work for my father? The man has sabotaged every career move I've ever made. This isn't about helping him, I explained. It's about positioning you for what comes next. When we take control, you'll already be in place to lead the division you should have inherited years ago. Adrian considered this, then nodded slowly. A Trojan horse approach. I like it. Within a week, he accepted Maxwell's offer, immediately implementing changes that appeared productive but actually prepared the division for our takeover, reorganizing reporting structures, updating systems with software that would give us backdoor access, and identifying employees loyal to Maxwell who would need to be removed. 1 month before the wedding, Fortune magazine ran an exposé questioning the stability of Whitfield Enterprises, highlighting its unusual stock movements and suggesting internal turmoil. The stock plummeted 12% in a single day. Maxwell was frantic, trying to identify the source of the leak while handling panicked calls from investors. I found him in his home office at midnight, tie loosened, hair disheveled, staring at financial reports with bloodshot eyes. "Come to bed," I urged gently. "You need rest." "Someone is deliberately trying to destroy me," he growled. This article had internal information that only a few people knew. I perched on the edge of his desk, careful to hide my satisfaction. "Could it be that new head of security you hired after Victor left? He seems uncomfortable around you." Maxwell looked up sharply. "Williams? What have you noticed?" I shrugged delicately. "Just little things. He's always watching you in meetings. And didn't he work for Barnes Consolidated before joining Whitfield?" The seed of doubt planted, I watched it bloom into certainty in Maxwell's exhausted mind. 2 days later, he fired the security chief, further isolating himself from potential allies who might have identified the real threat. But my careful planning hit an unexpected obstacle the following week. While reviewing documents in Maxwell's home office during his morning run, I didn't hear him return early. The door opened as I was photographing his private notes on an upcoming board meeting. Maxwell froze in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion as he spotted his desk drawer open and papers spread across the surface. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. I slipped the tiny camera into my palm, relying on the skills I'd practiced for 3 years. "Looking for a pen that actually works," I said with annoyance. "I need to finalize the seating chart for the wedding, and every pen in this house seems to be dry." I held up a fountain pen from his desk. "Even this expensive one is useless." His eyes narrowed, not fully convinced. Later that afternoon, I noticed him checking the corners of the room, running his fingers under the desk edge. He found one of my listening devices that evening, holding it up with cold fury. "Care to explain this?" My heart raced, but I was prepared for this contingency. I stared at the device, then at him, letting my eyes widen with hurt and confusion. "What is that? Where did you find it?" "Under my desk," he snapped. "A listening device. Have you seen it before?" I shook my head emphatically.
Never.
"Max, what's going on?" "That's what I'm trying to determine." His voice was dangerous, controlled. I let tears fill my eyes. "You think I planted that? To what end?" "To listen to you talk about stock options while I'm planning our wedding." Before he could respond, I had a flash of inspiration. "Wait, didn't you just fire your head of security? The one who had access to every room in this apartment? The one who worked for your biggest competitor before joining Whitfield?" I watched doubt flicker across Maxwell's face. I pressed my advantage, allowing a tear to slip down my cheek. "I can't believe you would suspect me after everything. Maybe your friend the senator was right about you." "What did William say to you?" Maxwell demanded, momentarily distracted. "That you're incapable of trusting anyone. That you see betrayal everywhere." I turned away, shoulders shaking with convincing sobs. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding until you decide if you can actually trust me." It worked. Maxwell's suspicion gave way to guilt and fear of losing me. He pulled me into his arms, apologizing profusely. "Of course I trust you. I'm just under tremendous pressure. Everyone really is out to get me." "Not everyone," I whispered against his chest, hiding my smile. "Not me." The next day, I suggested Maxwell needed to clear his head. "Let's get away this weekend. The lake house in Vermont. No phones, no business. Just us." He hesitated, then nodded, the exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Maybe you're right. Just a couple of days." That weekend, while Maxwell was unreachable in a remote location with deliberately poor cell service, Nemesis Capital executed its final purchases, securing 51% ownership of Whitfield Enterprises. Adrian sent me a one-word text confirming our success. Done. We returned from Vermont to find 7 urgent messages from Maxwell's executive team. An emergency board meeting had been called by the mysterious majority shareholder who had remained anonymous until now. Maxwell kissed me goodbye Monday morning, straightening his tie with determination. Don't worry, darling. By tonight, I'll have this sorted out. He looked almost his old, confident self. Nobody outmaneuvers Maxwell Whitfield. I smiled and helped him straighten his tie. Good luck. I know you'll win. As the door closed behind him, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. 3 years of planning, months of careful deception, all leading to this day. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Sophia. The endgame begins. Be ready. The morning of the emergency board meeting dawned clear and bright. Maxwell left our penthouse confident and determined, having spent the weekend strategizing his counterattack against the mysterious majority shareholder. He kissed me goodbye with renewed swagger. Don't worry, darling. By tonight, I'll have this sorted out. He adjusted his custom Brioni tie with practiced fingers. Nobody outmaneuvers Maxwell Whitfield. I helped him straighten his tie, admiring how completely he had underestimated me. Good luck. I know you'll win. The moment the door closed behind him, I abandoned the soft, supportive persona I'd maintained for nearly a year. I moved with purposeful efficiency to the guest bedroom that housed my real wardrobe, not the feminine, delicate clothes Maxwell preferred, but sharp, powerful pieces I'd selected for this very day. I chose a charcoal gray power suit with subtle red pinstripes, paired with black Louboutins that added 4 inches to my height. My makeup was minimal but deliberate, my hair pulled back in a severe low ponytail. The transformation was remarkable, from supportive fiancé to corporate raider in 30 minutes. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror was a stranger to Maxwell Whitfield. Today, he would finally meet the real Rebecca Reynolds. At Nemesis Capital's offices, Sophia, Adrian, and representatives from all the businesses Maxwell had destroyed over the years were gathered in the conference room. Large screens displayed live security footage from Whitfield Tower, where the board meeting would begin in 1 hour. Everyone clear on the plan? I asked, surveying the room. Years of planning had led to this moment. Sophia nodded, adjusting her own impeccable suit. As CEO of our largest shell company, she would begin the meeting, keeping Maxwell off balance until my arrival. We're ready, she confirmed. The security team is prepared for his reaction, which I expect will be explosive. Adrian looked nervous, but determined. I've transferred control of the West Coast Division systems to our team. When you give the word, we'll lock him out of everything simultaneously. Perfect. I turned to the screens, watching Maxwell stride into Whitfield Tower, oblivious to what awaited him. Let's begin. I monitored the board meeting from my car as my driver navigated through Manhattan traffic. Sophia, acting as Nemesis Capital's representative, informed the stunned board that the majority shareholder wished to remain anonymous for now but had appointed her as the new CEO, effective immediately. Maxwell's reaction was exactly as predicted, confusion followed by explosive anger. The security cameras captured his meltdown as he threatened board members and demanded to know who was behind the takeover. This is MY Company, he shouted, slamming his fist on the polished table. I built it from nothing. Some faceless coward doesn't get to steal it with paperwork. The board members shifted uncomfortably, several checking their phones where documents detailing Maxwell's questionable business practices, documents I'd spent years collecting, had just been delivered anonymously. Maxwell attempted to call me repeatedly, growing increasingly desperate as I deliberately ignored his messages. His texts evolved from confident, minor hiccup at the office. Don't worry. To frantic, need you to contact my lawyer immediately. To desperate, please call me now. After 3 hours, with Maxwell having alienated the few allies he had left through his erratic behavior, I sent a text to Sophia. It's time. My car pulled up to Whitfield Tower. In the lobby, employees stared as I strode toward the executive elevator, no longer playing the role of Maxwell's decorative fiancé, but moving with the confident authority of an owner. The security guards, already updated with new protocols, nodded respectfully. "Ms. Reynolds," one said, using my real name for the first time in nearly a year. The boardroom fell silent as the doors opened. Maxwell's back was to me, his posture rigid with fury as he berated the board's legal counsel. He turned at the sudden silence, his expression changing from relief to confusion as he took in my transformed appearance. "Elise, what are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" I took the empty seat at the head of the table, his seat. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, ignoring Maxwell completely. "As the majority shareholder and new chairwoman of Whitfield Enterprises, I'd like to introduce myself properly." I looked directly at Maxwell as I delivered the blow. "My name is Rebecca Reynolds. Some of you knew my father, Edward Reynolds, whose business and life were destroyed by Mr. Whitfield. Today, justice comes full circle." The color drained from Maxwell's face as recognition dawned. "Reynolds," he whispered, "you're Edward's daughter? The one whose college fund you destroyed. The one who found her father's body after your predatory practices drove him to suicide." My voice remained steady, professional. "The one you dismissed as nothing without you." Maxwell's shock gave way to rage. He lunged across the table toward me, screaming, "You manipulative bitch. You've betrayed me." Security, now my security, restrained him instantly. I remained perfectly composed, not even flinching, which further highlighted his instability in front of the board and the company executives watching via video conference. "As you can see, gentlemen," I continued as if there had been no interruption, "Mr. Whitfield lacks the temperament to lead this company. But his character flaws are the least of the issues we need to address today." I nodded to Sophia, who distributed detailed dossiers to each board member. These documents outline Mr. Whitfield's systematic illegal activities, the stolen intellectual property, the bribery of officials including Senator Williams, the harassment of former employees, and, most significantly, the financial fraud that has kept this company afloat on paper while it's been sinking in reality. The board members flipped through the documents with increasing alarm. Maxwell struggled against the security guards, his face contorted with hatred. "You have nothing," he spat. "These are lies." "Actually," I replied, nodding to Adrian, who activated a screen on the wall, "we have everything, including your private servers, which your son has been kind enough to grant us access to." Adrian stepped forward, no longer the resentful son but a confident executive. "The encryption wasn't that complex, Dad. You always did use Mom's birthday for everything." Maxwell's eyes widened in shock at this second betrayal. "Adrian? You helped her do this?" "You stole my inheritance," Adrian replied coldly. "Consider this me reclaiming it." I turned back to the board. "You have a choice, gentlemen. Support the restructuring plan I proposed, or face criminal charges as accomplices. The evidence implicates several of you in Mr. Whitfield's schemes." The vote was unanimous. Within 20 minutes, Maxwell Whitfield was removed as CEO and from the board of the company that bore his name. As he was escorted from the building, still shouting threats, I followed him to the lobby. In a moment of privacy by the revolving doors, I removed the ostentatious engagement ring from my finger and placed it in his palm. "You were right about one thing, Maxwell," I said quietly. "I was nothing without you. I needed your arrogance and cruelty to fuel every step of my plan. For that, I thank you." His fingers closed around the ring, knuckles white with fury. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I still have resources, connections. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I smiled coldly.
No, Maxwell.
"You had no idea who you were dealing with. That was your downfall." I stepped back as the security guards moved forward. "Goodbye, Mr. Whitfield. I believe your car is waiting." As he was led outside, I returned to the boardroom where the future of Whitfield Enterprises, soon to be Reynolds Enterprises, awaited my direction. The aftermath was immediate and dramatic. By evening, Maxwell's face was splashed across business publications worldwide. "Corporate raider taken down by fiancé in historic revenge takeover." Financial analysts scrambled to understand how a previously unknown woman had orchestrated one of the most sophisticated corporate takeovers in recent history. I granted one exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal, explaining calmly that this was never about money, it was about accountability. Maxwell Whitfield built his fortune by destroying others, I stated. My father was just one of dozens of victims. Today marks the beginning of a new era for this company, one built on ethical business practices and responsibility to employees and communities. Within 48 hours, Maxwell attempted to rally his allies for a counterattack, only to discover I'd systematically neutralized each one. Senator Williams faced an ethics investigation based on evidence of bribes. Maxwell's banker found himself under audit. His lawyer was confronted with documentation of conflicts of interest that threatened his license. Every safety net had been eliminated. I moved into Maxwell's corner office and immediately began implementing changes. My first act was establishing a fund to compensate all the business owners and employees who had suffered from Maxwell's predatory practices. The second was creating a whistleblower protection program within the company to ensure no one could ever again build a culture of fear and intimidation. The marketing team was instructed to begin preparations for rebranding from Whitfield Enterprises to Reynolds Enterprises. Not just a name change, I explained to the nervous executives. A fundamental shift in how we conduct business. Maxwell filed multiple lawsuits against me personally and Nemesis Capital, claiming fraud, misrepresentation, and theft of corporate secrets. I responded by holding a press conference, calmly presenting the evidence of his illegal activities that I'd accumulated over years. Would you like to continue this in court, Mr. Whitfield? I asked the cameras, knowing he would be watching. I'm prepared to disclose everything. The lawsuits were withdrawn within days. Adrian stepped forward publicly as my ally, giving interviews about his father's business practices and personal abuse. This family betrayal, combined with financial ruin, sent Maxwell into a spiral. Paparazzi photographed him, looking disheveled and shouting at reporters outside his suddenly empty Manhattan apartment, the deed to which, I'd made sure, had been transferred to my name months earlier. When my security team reported that Maxwell had been selling personal assets to raise capital for a potential counterstrike, I froze his remaining accounts through legal injunctions based on evidence of money laundering, effectively cutting off his resources. For the first time in his life, Maxwell Whitfield was truly powerless. Sophia proved invaluable during the transition, her decade of banking experience helping stabilize the company as we restructured. We need to be careful, she cautioned during a late-night strategy session. Too much change too quickly could spook the market. Agreed. I nodded. We'll implement the ethical reforms immediately, but pace the structural changes over 6 months. 6 months after the takeover, I invited all of Maxwell's former victims to Whitfield Tower, now officially renamed Reynolds Enterprises. The lobby had been transformed, the imposing portrait of Maxwell replaced by a wall bearing my father's favorite quote, "Success without integrity is failure." Together, we unveiled a new business ethics initiative and scholarship program for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The program would provide not just funding but mentorship and protection from predatory business practices. My father believed that business should create value, not just extract it, I told the assembled crowd. Reynolds Enterprises will honor that vision by fostering a new generation of ethical business leaders. The press coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Even former critics of Whitfield Enterprises began to acknowledge the substantive changes taking place within the company. Stock prices, initially volatile after the takeover, stabilized and began to climb as investors responded to our transparent approach. Maxwell made one final desperate move, attempting to break into my penthouse in a drunken rage. Security camera footage of his arrest went viral, the once mighty business titan reduced to a ranting intruder being led away in handcuffs. In a moment of compassion that surprised even me, I declined to press charges. Instead, I required him to enter rehabilitation as part of a settlement agreement. Why not bury him completely? Adrian asked when I informed him of my decision. Because this was never about revenge for its own sake, I explained. It was about justice and restoration. Your father has lost everything that mattered to him, his company, his reputation, his power. Making him a martyr would serve no purpose. 1 year to the day after taking control of the company, I stood on the rooftop of Reynolds Enterprises at sunset, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. Sophia joined me, carrying a special bottle of champagne. Your father's favorite, she said, handing me a glass. Kept for special occasions. We toasted silently, watching the fading light turn the city's windows to gold. He would be proud, Sophia said finally. I hope so. I took another sip, feeling the weight of the past 3 years lifting at last. But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. What do you mean? I smiled, revealing my next plan. We're creating an ethical investment fund specifically targeting businesses threatened by predatory corporations. No one should have to go through what my father did. We have the resources and the knowledge to prevent it now. The final scene mirrored the opening, me looking in a mirror, but now in my father's restored office. I no longer needed to practice looking naive or demure. I faced my reflection with confidence and purpose, the photograph of my father on the desk behind me. Some call it revenge, I said to his memory. I call it justice. As I turned away from the mirror, multiple screens in my office monitored potential targets, other corrupt executives who still didn't suspect that their newest, seemingly naive investor was actually their nemesis. The empire hadn't just fallen, it had been reborn with a purpose that transcended mere profit. Maxwell Whitfield had been right about one thing. I had been nothing without him. His cruelty had forged me into someone stronger and more determined than I could have imagined. But now, I was something he would never be, a force for positive change in the cutthroat world he'd thrived in. And I was just getting started. What would you sacrifice for justice? Your identity, your heart, or your soul? Like and subscribe for more stories of revenge served with devastating precision.